Metaphor ReFantazio was one of the biggest games of 2024. Part of the reason why this game was so great was because of its diverse range of characters, especially the party members that joined you on your journey. I mean honestly, look at these guys. Some bad dude with large eyes, Mummy Hulkenberg with that redhead fringe and pointy ears, and then this chick with 3 eyes. The cast of Metaphor was amazing, and in my opinion, one of the best casts in RPG history. Everything from the main story to individual stories to gameplay enhancements and mechanics was amazing, and truly felt special when you played through the game. And then by the end of the game, and my roughly 100-hour journey, I just wanted to hang out with all my friends even more. So just like with any ATLUS game, it's time to sow some discourse and create the definitive party member tier list for Metaphor ReFantazio. So I'll be going through each party member in Metaphor and placing them into tiers. You may not agree with me on some of this, probably most of this actually. I would love to read your opinions, so please leave a comment down below about what you think of this tier list and what you would have in your tier list. Please also consider subscribing if you enjoyed the video and leaving a like as well. Also, spoiler warning, I will be talking about all aspects of each party member, including some story elements and gameplay unlocks and mechanics. You may not have unlocked some characters or gameplay mechanics yet, so definitely bookmark this video, and once you complete the game, come back to it and give it a watch. So starting off with the first person you meet and befriend in the game, and that is Gallica. Now Gallica is considered to be probably more of the mascot character rather than sort of like the navigational character, although I guess she does fill both roles as a Navi as well as a mascot character in Metaphor ReFantazio. So she's kind of the jack of all trades in this regard, but overall she is a real G and definitely helps out the protagonist throughout the game. Now I did think her story was okay. It wasn't like anything spectacular. She didn't really have that much of a backstory. I mean, it's all sort of alluded to in that arc where you visit the Elden Stronghold, Elden hometown, where we find out where, you know, who the prince really is, and then, you know, how she's been guiding him throughout this journey, throughout the entire game, basically. So nothing too special, nothing too cliche either. So, you know, story was okay. Now, in terms of gameplay, she's not actually that annoying compared to other mascots as well as other Navi characters. Although, if you're grinding, she definitely can be. But overall, not too bad. Now, I actually didn't really mind Morgana in Persona 5 too much, so I'm not really in that boat where navigation characters are really annoying. So, you know, I guess I'm the outlier in this community about that. But I think she does okay. I think the idea behind her magic, which is like plays as music throughout the game to the protagonist, I thought was a really cool idea, and it's a good way to just introduce sort of, you know, Shoji Meguro score throughout the game basically as like sort of a gameplay / story element, especially because these fairy type characters seem to be able to use magic, whereas a lot of the other townsfolk or people in Metaphor ReFantazio are not able to do that. They have to use igniters and stuff instead of like real magic, I guess. So that's another cool aspect as well. Now, if we talk about combat, she doesn't really do much, let's be real. She does kind of give tips here and there, but it is a little bit weird with how her tips and stuff work. So sometimes she is kind of just really useless in combat, let's be real. Like there was a mechanic I remember that they're sort of brought over from like Persona 5 where in certain boss fights, there's a little bit of a gimmick mechanic. So, you know, the mechanic about her hitting the apples or some shit of this dude, and, you know, preventing him from healing was what wasn't really taken further. It was like this boss, and then he returns later on in the game, and it was like that same boss as well. There was that part with the eggshell man after the first cathedral dungeon, for example, that we kind of got a gimmick as well. But then all the other mainline bosses, we don't really have at least a memorable gimmick. So in terms of combat, yeah, it was a bit hit and miss. Like that was the same thing in Persona 5 as well. It was a bit hit and miss with those gimmicks for those major boss fights. She is the inheritor of the Mage archetype, which is one of the most powerful archetypes in the game, considering that, you know, you basically can spam a lot of magic attacks. And magic is actually very good in the late game of Metaphor as well, especially if you're doing sort of the I guess the Warlord builds and stuff like that. I've seen people doing crazy shit with the Warlock builds, as well as the Elemental Master builds as well. So they do have a lot of type coverage. There's a lot of coverage as well for abilities and whatnot. So it's definitely a good archetype to have, and she is the one that provides it. Now, her rank ups are sort of set within the story, so you don't actually get Elemental Master as well as Warlock until pretty much really late in the game, which is why it's a good late game build. But in terms of mages overall, they give very good courage, very good for grinding, very good for mobs. Now, abilities like Followers, Echoes, and stuff like that with her rank up for her follower bonds are a bit average, but her best ability is actually the phase sight acuity ability, which basically gives you an additional press turn, or has a chance of giving you an additional press turn. Now, in theory, that is kind of useful, but in practice, I don't know about you guys, but it could be a difficulty thing. But when I was playing on hard, I barely ever got phase sight, and there were some fights where I was actually testing to see how many resets I would have to do in order to get phase sight, if it was consistent or if it was completely random. I didn't have that much of a sample size, but to me, it's just completely freaking random. And honestly, it didn't really come off that often. Having an additional press turn, though, in the higher difficulties is definitely very much appreciated, especially considering that the enemies do get an additional press turn as well in their combat phase, and it can be definitely devastating if you don't have your additional one, or at least you can't get additional ones with hitting weaknesses and whatnot. So phase sight's definitely a plus, but overall her combat utility is a bit lacking. But then the only good thing about Gallica, I guess you could say, is just her mage ability. So overall, I would put Gallica in the B tier. She's not, terrible or complete shit, but she's also just not very good either overall. So, she's a pretty good companion, so I'll put her in B. So up next we have Strohl Boy, who I thought would be best boy, and to be honest, in some people's eyes, is best boy, but best boy for me is definitely being taken up by another character that we'll talk about later in the video. Now, Strohl's awakening was actually so dope. I think the awakenings in this game overall, except for a couple, are actually really cool. I do like how how noble he is, I guess. Like, he's just a dude who just honestly just wants to right the wrongs of the world that he sort of sees and that he lives in, especially what happened with his hometown, getting attacked by humans, and then finding out later that it was Luis, etc, etc. It was just really cool. It was really dope, and yeah, I just love how he's just a noble in this wretched society, but has the honor and courage to always try and do what's right. Now, his follower bond was a bit, I don't know, like it was okay. Like, I did appreciate sort of the way that he's trying to find, to rehome displaced residents of his previous town. I do feel that it was very heartfelt, but there was a little bit in the mid ranks that I thought were a bit boring. I did skip a few lines of dialogue for that, I'm not gonna lie. But at the ending, where he actually finally achieves his goal and earns the money, or at least raises the money in order to help his community, help his little village, it definitely tugs at the heartstrings, and once again reinforces his inherent noble instinct, which I think it's just really cool. So obviously Strohl unlocks the warrior archetype, which is one of the best archetypes in the game, hands down for sure, especially if you do a strength build. And most people, they usually, especially like some of the, I guess, best builds in the game, go strength first in the early to mid game and then magic late. But you can always, carry strength basically throughout the entire game, which was, which is really good. But yeah, warrior is one of the best damage dealing strength builds in the game. If you don't agree with me, you can fight me with your Berserker, but we'll talk about that later. And there's other follower bonds as well. You get Undaunted Spirit, which raises his crit rate against human type monsters, which is definitely useful, especially in some of the later human type monster fights. Definitely it's worth considering having Strohl, especially the final boss as well, because the final boss is considered human type as well. So Strohl also has one of the best strength stat growths in the game, just one of the highest strength stats. But I believe actually a character that we'll talk about later on actually has a higher strength stat base, I believe. But his stats overall is well balanced, especially for everything except for magic pretty much. But I mean, you're not really going to use magic on Strohl anyway, so it's pretty good. So if you didn't know, the warrior can actually reach the highest damage cap in the game fairly easily. And honestly, if you did go a strength build and you didn't just spam Peerless Stonecleaver or Crimson Moon Art in all of the early game, then I don't know what you were doing, because those synthesis abilities were absolutely broken. Royal Warrior as well, when you get access to the royal lineages, which is like the second tier, or the final tier awakenings of your character's inherent archetype. Royal Warrior is absolutely busted, especially with Slash Surge, which gives you an additional 30% a boost on slash attacks. And I believe this does actually stack as well on it, which is really sick, as well as Noble Warrior's Soul. So if you defeat enemies and mobs with physical attacks, then you don't actually use a press stone, which is really cool. Obviously, Toby makes an appearance on Royal Warrior as well, so that's pretty cool. So it's interesting to see that all the SMT stuff is carrying over, which is cool. But yeah, Slash Surge with this strength build, you reach the highest damage caps with Peerless Stonecleaver, absolutely for sure. And then if you build crit on top of that, Strohl just becomes an absolute menace in the game, and the warrior lineage is definitely something that I highly recommend in the game. And yeah, honestly, like, I can't really deny it. Strohl is pretty sick. I like his design. I like his story. Obviously, I like his gameplay because like you could just do a shit ton of damage. So Strohl is definitely getting put into S tier. Alright, next we have Hulkenberg. Now, Hulkenberg has got to be one of my favorite characters and favorite character designs that Shigenori Sojima has ever done. I just love it. I love how she's the original mascot as well when this game was Project ReFantazio. But Hulkenberg is just absolutely amazing. Like, just look at the design. It looks absolutely peak. Her voice acting in this game is absolutely impeccable. Her voice actress Kristen Atherton did an amazing job, and her awakening was epic, especially with her long ass name.
My name is Iselin Pacelli Majal Hulkenberg.
And I love the way she calls out her archetypes in combat. Now, her story about not being able to protect the prince was very special to me, because I've been in a similar situation, and the guilt you feel really does eat you up without trauma dumping on you. Let's just say I related to her a lot, and especially a lot about the guilt that she feels. I love that in the story as well, that she was actually a royal knight who wasn't necessarily disgraced or like sort of displaced. It was that she just feels so guilty about not being able to protect the prince that she kind of just left off her own accord to do her own thing, because realizing that like she just kind of needs to get more powerful. I think that whole her protective of the prince is just a really cool dynamic, and it plays well throughout the story. Now, let's be honest, her follower bond was a bit meh in my opinion. It wasn't actually that good. Like, it was cool and all about her being sort of trying to contemplate, or at least be content with her life in the Knights and what was going on, and seeing how she could sort of protect the prince again, I guess. But if I'm being honest, I don't really care too much if old mate was a bad knight captain and she had to kind of stop him. Although I did really want to see her kick his ass, but instead we got this line of text, which is very disappointing. In fact, there's quite a lot of that sort of stuff in the follower bonds, especially how the follower bonds weren't actually voice acted as well, which is definitely disappointing, and I would love to heard Kristen Atherton a lot more. Maybe Metaphor Retold, who knows. Now, her rank ups for her follower bonds for guard duty is pretty good. So defends the protagonist from an attack that would hit the protagonist's weakness, which is very useful in a game like Metaphor, because you're obviously constantly changing weaknesses with the party setups that you're doing. Now, this, in my playtesting, or at least in my playthrough, this didn't actually trigger that much. I think it triggered like maybe once or twice. It did trigger like, for me, I can't remember exactly what boss fight, but it did trigger like in one boss fight that I was like, okay, thank God that happened, because otherwise I probably would have died. But it didn't really trigger that much, and I think that might be a difficulty thing. I don't know if you guys played on easy or normal, did it trigger more often for you, but guard duty is definitely a really cool ability. And then obviously she is of the knight archetype, and this archetype early on in the game was really good, especially with Knight's Proclamation, which was an absolute godsend that you were able to get a taunting tank, basically. Now, her archetypes later in the game, such as Paladin as well as Dark Knight, are really good. But in my opinion, I think that there are other archetypes that are just better, that just slot in. Now, I know a lot of people have used Paladin and Dark Knight, especially in the late game, especially with Holy Knight's Proclamation, which is basically Knight's proc, but you can guard, and you get like counters, magic counters, revitalize, Knight's defense, protect guard, and then your synthesis abilities as well are really, really good, especially with like hammer of justice and stuff for doing pierce builds. But with the prevalence of items, I do find her utility lacks a little bit, although maybe I just probably haven't really played the proper builds and party member setups with her yet. Also, I need to mention that Hulkenberg has the highest endurance stat growth in the game, or base stats in general. Her overall stats are well balanced as well, with strength, magic, and endurance, although very lacking in agility. But that's okay, because she's an absolute tank, so it's fine. Now, her royal archetype, the Royal Knight, is actually like pretty good, I'm not gonna lie, especially with abilities like instant recovery. Instant recovery is just like so good. Like, I absolutely hate any sort of ailment effects in this game. It could just really be debilitating, so instant recovery is like a mad skill to have. And then you've got stuff like ultimate guard for a synthesis. Like, look at it, raises the barrier for one non-almighty attack for all allies. Like, this is super useful. Pair that with that item that gives you like that one less press turns required for synthesis, and this thing is just, and it's 30 MP. Like, this thing is just absolutely busted, as well as stuff like Pierce Surge Omni counter, Noble Knight Soul, which every time you use a proc ability, you get an additional press turn. So basically, you can nice proc for absolutely, holy nice proc for absolutely free, which is really good. And yeah, if you unlock Royal Knight, I could definitely see this being absolutely busted in the late game. But I think overall for Hulkenberg, just because her follow-up bond wasn't that memorable compared to the others, and her Archetype, in my opinion, isn't that useful. At least I didn't find that much of a use, because I was mostly fine with staying alive in the late game, but just really needed damage to get through some of the bosses. So in that regard, I put Hulkenberg in the A tier. Now we move on to Heismay Noctule, one of the top 2 party members in the game. Absolutely hands down, this dude was sick. His story was absolutely impeccable. I 100% cried during his monologue at the end of the Material arc with Junah, and like seriously, you can watch that video up on YouTube. Like that whole speech and that whole arc in general about him going to the sandworm's nest and finding out that it's Heismay Noctule, like the assassin and all this sort of stuff, and how he's like a wanted outlaw criminal, but realistically he was just, you know, he just wanted to grieve and protect his kid. Oh, like it was just absolutely 100% peak. Some of the best writing ATLUS has ever done, ever, in my opinion. And yeah, it was just, this dude, honestly, like, this dude was sick. And his voice actor, dude, like, Philip Sprohl, mate, like, seriously, just, I don't know, do some ASMR or some shit, but like, dude, your voice is so nice to listen to. It was really cool. Now, his follow-up bond story was also 10 out of 10 easily. Navigating the guilt and pure loneliness of losing a loved one was actually so profound, but the act of moving on and doing what's best is what is truly noble and takes a lot of courage from him. And that's sort of the lesson that he teaches you throughout his journey to find a burial, a proper burial for his son that he never actually got to do. It was just, yeah, it was immaculate. It was honestly, I felt shit that I haven't felt like ever. But you know, honestly, like in video games, man, like you don't expect that sort of stuff. And yeah, he's this really cool character. I absolutely love him. You know, he teaches you stuff like, no matter how hard or on things get, you know, you have to remain compassionate and empathetic, and the list can go on and on. I can make a whole like video essay on this dude. His follow-up on story and his story throughout Metaphor ReFantazio, like the main story, was just really good. I absolutely appreciated it, and honestly, like, just replaying the game, this dude always is a highlight of the journey. And I mean, let's be real, he's a badass bad dude, and like, look at his character portrait. It's just so cute. Those large eyes, like the character design, so Jimmy, you cooked again, mate. Now, his follow-up bond ability, preternatural hearing. I don't know, it's a bit average, it's a bit meh, like, you know, what, shows the strongest enemies on the minimap or some shit. Like, I don't really care. Like, in the game, and any person who's played, like, you know, Persona or any other ATLUS game, like, if you wanted to, you go seeking out for the strong dudes anyway. Like, I guess it's useful to know that they're strong, so you don't, if you're not strong, you can avoid them. But, you know, if you're doing saves and stuff, like, it would be fine. Like, it's not that useful of an ability. Now, his archetype or main archetype is Thief, and apart from farming items and just being like a one-hit kill sort of machine-ish type archetype, it is kind of useless, I'm not gonna lie. I don't really use the Thief that much, to be perfectly honest. I did use a little bit of the Assassin, which is the second tier in the Thief archetype, a little bit, because you do get access to like stuff like Assassinate and stuff, which can one-shot kill mobs. But honestly, like stuff like Shadow Dwellers and just basically dodging, the dodging capabilities and agility capabilities of Heismay is probably something that that is the most useful, I guess, because Heismay does have the highest agility stat in the game, or it's agility stat growth in the game. And overall, his stats are actually not that badly balanced, but you're using Heismay basically as like a agility dodge sort of utility character, and the Thief archetype in general is just not very useful. Like, even if you get to the pinnacle as well, like the ninja class, it's aight. Like, its agility law and third eye are pretty busted, but you know, it is what it is. Now, on the other hand, his royal archetype in the Royal Thief is absolutely busted, especially in the late game, where bosses are getting like 4 to 8 press turns. Yes, you Luis, especially because if you don't do any of the crystals to get the trophy, man, like, he has like freaking 8 or 10 press turns every single turn, and it's an absolute nightmare to freaking deal with. But just with one ability, Noble Thief Soul depletes all of enemies' turn icons if their attack is dodged, And then obviously I would inherit agility lore for this to get the additional Tsukukaja and hit evasion rate at the beginning of battle. It's just so good. And you can obviously, do nice proc or holy nice proc or whatever sort of taunting ability to make sure that the bosses attack you, and then you dodge, and then 8 press turns gone. Just gone. Royal Thief is definitely the best archetype hands down in the game, just for its utility base and how easy it is to proc the actual ability of Noble Thief's Soul. Yeah, like honestly, Heismay is just like, Heismay overall is just a really sick character. I love him to death. His story, his follow-up bonds, and then his Royal Thief archetype, super good. His archetype not too much, but his Royal Thief archetype is definitely so good. So for that reason, Heismay 100% goes into the S tier. I would even put him in the S plus tier if there was an S plus tier. Now we will move on to the songstress herself, Junah. So Junah overall, I do really like her design. I feel like if she didn't have the headpiece though, her forehead would be absolutely massive. But her hair is really well captured, and overall, like, I think I really like the sassy nature of her. I think she's pretty cool. Her story premise of her being sort of like a secret operative, because I remember when you first kind of meet her and she's with like Del, Basiliio, and Luis, you're just like, well, like what the fuck's going on, like, because obviously with the previous stuff, that she's a party member. So her being like a secret operative was pretty cool, but they didn't really delve that deep into it. It was kind of just like, oh, she's got guided by this voice or whatever, which ended up being all not confirmed, but alluded to that it was actually Will's mum's spirit. Oh, sorry, the protagonist's mum's spirit. But overall, it was pretty cool that she was a secret operative. I did spoil myself, obviously, because I looked at all the trailers. But if you didn't watch any sort of trailer or spoiler for Junah, that probably would have blew your mind. So that was pretty cool. Her awakening, though, was definitely a bit meh in general. Like, it wasn't really that much standout, and like later on you do find out her ambitions and stuff to just be able to bring joy to the world with her singing. But during her awakening, it was a bit like, I don't know, it was a bit strange, because it was just like you kind of felt like she was a bit cocky, like, that she would sing and then kind of just be the premier talent of Uchronia. But anyway, I digress. I'm probably overthinking it a bit too much, but her awakening was a bit meh, wasn't too good. So in terms of gameplay mechanics, Junah has one of the best magic stat growths in the game, but her overall balance of stats is pretty mediocre. Like, she's got abysmal strength, abysmal endurance, abysmal agility, so she'll be more often or not getting absolutely pumped by like bosses and just harder mob fights in general. But realistically, she kind of only really does one thing, which I will allude to later. But first of all, we'll go to her follower bonds. And Junah's follower bond is Triumphant Hymn. So after battle, all party members will recover a little bit of MP. And this is really, really good. This is really good just to even have her just in the party killing mobs and stuff, especially if you're killing mobs in the overworld as well. Actually, I don't know if it procs with mobs in the overworld, but regardless, like, even if you just be like really low tier mobs at beginnings of dungeons and all that sort of stuff, really good useful ability to get, especially because MP can definitely be a very hard to manage resource, especially when a lot of abilities cost a lot of MP in the late game. Now, we did allude to her archetype. So her archetype is the Masked Dancer, which is basically a magic-based archetype. So that's why her strength spread or her stat spread doesn't really matter too much in terms of like strength and all that sort of stuff. So she really only is doing one thing, which is just dealing really high-powered magic attacks. But the thing is with the Masked Dancer is that she does require the accessory slot to be filled with different sort of accessories or different masks that you can actually use to augment her abilities. So for example, if we go to the equipment section, go to Junah, so you can see here we got accessories, and then she gets access to these special type of accessories, also known as masks. So you got Soul Hugger's mask. So basically, if you just equip these abilities, she gets the abilities of the specific archetype. You can craft these with more as well at Academia. But this does take up an accessory slot, especially because some accessory slots in the late game are actually very important, and she kind of just eats it up a little bit. Sometimes the abilities as well, it's not like you can just inherit all the abilities from those archetypes with those masks as well. Like, you only get a certain set of abilities, and sometimes it's not that great. Sometimes it's pretty good, but sometimes it's not that great. And I just feel like accessory slots in the late game are actually very, very important, especially because you can get some absolutely busted accessories like this Utilitarian's Manual, which reduces the turn icon and senses, for example. So in that regard, it's a bit meh. But although, to be fair, her later on, or her like final lineage in that archetype in that lineage is actually Persona Master, and it's a pretty cool callback as well, especially because like when you use Persona Master, it does like the moves of like a Persona, right? And she even calls it like Persona, so it's pretty cool. Now, with the caveat with the Master Dancer and basic her lineages all that sort of stuff, is this ability here called Masquerade Charge. So Masquerade Charge greatly increases the party's physical attacks damage once per battle. I think that's a mistranslation. It's not once per battle. It's basically just a group charge. And this is the ability that most likely you would use Junah for. And if I'm being honest, like she's really just a group charge bot. It's really useful, especially in physical teams, especially with like, strength build, like warrior archetype with Strohl, for example, really good. And then that utilitarian manual that gives you sort of one less, because this usually costs 2 press turns, but now it gives you, one less, so it only costs 1 press turn. 1 press turn for a group charge is absolutely busted. But the caveat with that is that you miss out on the mask, so you don't really actually get that many good abilities, aside from, these ones where you can make the enemy weak to certain elements, which is not bad in its own right, but basically she's only really used for a group charge, but the group charge is actually pretty freaking broken. So, and that goes the same with her archetype as well. So with Junah's royal archetype, actually, which is the Royal Masked Dancer, it's pretty much the same story. But you do get Noble Dancer Soul, which prevents turn icon loss from like elemental attacks, similar to like Noble Warrior Soul with physical attacks. And you also get Magic Surge as well, which increases magic skill attack by 20%, which I believe is the highest, or one of the highest in the games. But again, she's only really there for Masquerade Charge, so that's why I had a bit of hard time putting her between S and A, because I think in terms of story and stuff, honestly, she's like probably like a B or a C. But in terms of gameplay, it's definitely S or an A, which I think averages out to an A, so that's why I probably just put her in A. But she can definitely push up into the S tier just because of the group charge, but I'll put her in A. So next we have the three-eyed lady herself, Eupha. Now, Eupha has actually one of the largest MP pools in the game. I think she does have the largest MP pool in the game. And then if you level up sort of like the mage archetypes that gives you, or the archetypes that give you more MP per maxing or per mastering them, she does have a lot of MP eventually. I think like, well, here I've got 682, but I'm pretty sure like you can get it up to like nearly 750-ish by the end of the game, which, yeah, her just stat block in general, large MP pool is just really good in terms of utility. Now, Eupha's story, I didn't mind too much. I didn't think it was absolutely outstanding or anything like that. She kind of just rocked up and was just like, But the thing that I will say about Eupha's story is that it is very, how should I put this? I don't know how to put this articulately, but it is very interesting to see the nature of when you're sort of forced into beliefs that you yourself aren't exactly sure of, just because you grew up in that environment, or your parents believe that sort of stuff, and not being able to think for yourself. Because when you first get introduced to her, she believes that she needs to be sacrificed to the dragon god Et to do her duty, right? And she never really knows anything outside of her duty, which is a little bit of a shame, especially putting all that sort of pressure and, I guess, societal burden or like village burden in this context on a kid, or a young female, or just a young person in general. It's just not very fair. But I do like how she kind of broke out of that during her awakening. Her awakening I did find was actually better than Junah's, but it wasn't also the best awakening as well. I can understand why people didn't really like Junah's or Eupha's awakenings, but I did think that in terms of her awakening to her own self-belief and her own sort of views on the world and how she wants to explore the world, I think was pretty cool. Now, her follow-up on was a bit meh as well, just going through the motions and, I guess trying to help out people in religious limbo, or sort of limbo to where kind of she was feeling at the time or whatever. I didn't really actually know what was going on, if I'm being completely honest. I didn't really find it that interesting, and I ended up skipping most of the time anyway. But yeah, her follow-up on story, average at best, I guess. Now, her follow-up on abilities with pagan teaching is not too bad. So it reduces the chance of your party being afflicted with anxiety. Now, when I say it's not too bad, I think it's pretty shit, because when you get affected by anxieties when you get ambushed, or when you're fighting bosses, obviously, Now, the thing is, when this ability, I had her pretty much maxed out with her follower ranks with this ability, and I would always still get anxiety pretty commonly. Again, that could be a difficulty thing, I'm not actually sure, but it doesn't really help that much if I'm being honest. And if I'm also being honest, I usually just run away if I get ambushed and then re-engage into the fight and on an advantage. So I don't really find this really that useful anyway. Now, her archetype is the summoner archetype, which means you can actually summon different characters from the SMT and persona line, as well as, you know, metaphor as well, lines of characters. So, you know, you've got characters like Jack Frost and stuff in there as well, which is pretty cool from, I guess, like the mascot of ATLUS. So the archetype for the summoner is, I don't know, like, I think it's a bit average, to be honest. Like, if we take a look at like just the base summoner abilities, they're kind of just like a bit meh, especially because the MP costs of some of these is really high. So even though she does have a massive stat block in MP, I think it's a bit, I think it actually kind of gets balanced out just because like it costs a lot. And then some of the synthesis ability as well that costs a lot. Now, the drawback with the summoner is that in order to unlock the full breadth of abilities, especially for the devil summoner, for example, you do need to do special experiments, which are the little experiment section in academia. Now, fair enough, they are pretty straightforward, and to be honest, you'll get most of the materials just through playing the game, and then you can get different summoning abilities. But it is a little bit difficult to get some of the end game stuff, especially for Devil Summoner, like getting stuff like Megami, Wilder, and then I believe as well, I think it's this one, Summer Knight, or one of these ones is Jack Frost. Yeah, it's a bit difficult if you're not really actively exploring the world or going through dungeons, or buying items for vendors. So there is that to consider. You know, it's a bit like meh. You know, you kind of have to put in the effort to build her in order to actually get any sort of value for her. Otherwise, she just gives you zero value. Now, her royal summoner or her royal archetype is not too bad. So obviously you got the soul as well. But stuff like these modified Summon Theory and Summon Dragon God, these are some of the best and most powerful magic attacks in the game. So that's where sort of the utility, I guess that's where the best sort of experiments, special experiments with the different summonings is where it bears fruit. In the Royal Summoner, you do get access to very powerful attacks, but at the same time, you still need to do the experiments in order to get the unlocks, and whether or not that's actually like good or not, it's a bit meh. Like for example, this ability here where you just revive all allies to full HP is really, really good. But yeah, it just requires a lot of more exploring and buying from different vendors to try and unlock stuff like that. So in that regard, it's a bit like, you know, she doesn't really provide that much value unless you sort of put in the effort, which in my opinion is not that great, especially because you just have better options. Like Junah is even the better option as well, and having better options like Heismay, Hulkenberg, and Strohl is just, yeah. But, you know, that's my opinion. There's probably some nuke builds that people have done with Eupha and that go absolutely insane. Comment down below if you're one of those people, but I think overall, and just in terms of story aspect as well as gameplay aspect, I think Eupha just is probably a B. I wouldn't really rate her higher. She's not shit, but she's also just not that great, and I think there's just better options out there. Now we move on to the man himself, Basiliio. Now, Basilio's storyline in this game is honestly like rivaled with Heismay. I don't know whether he's like top 1 or Heismay is top 1 in this game, but Basiliio is absolutely awesome. I absolutely love his design. I love his dynamic with Del, his brother, and I absolutely loved his awakening in the game. It was so special. You can watch that video as well on my YouTube, like teared up, everything. It was just so emotionally charged. It was absolutely amazing. And I love how like his awakening was like, you know, obviously like the voice comes and, you know, like overload style, all that sort of stuff, but I love how it was just him and his brother. Like all he wants to do was just service his brother. Like that's all he wanted to do. It was just, you know, play around with his brother, have fun, and basically he truly believed that him and his brother could just conquer the world. especially with the tragedy that was sort of his backstory and how they experimented on his race and everything like that. So I think his awakening was absolutely one of the best awakenings in the game, probably the best awakening in the game, if I'm being completely honest. Yeah, I think just in general, his storyline throughout the game, where you meet him as sort of the bodyguards for Luis, and then later on he kind of realizes that Luis is like, hang on a second guys, like Luis is pretty shitty. I think it's just really cool. So yeah, in terms of story remarks, Basiliio definitely A+ for sure. Now, I'm not actually sure if he has one of the highest strength growths in the game or not, but I believe he's up there with Strohl for sure. And especially if you put it on strength archetypes such as his archetype, which is the Berserker, or the Warrior archetype, I'm sure his strength can go off the charts, to the 99 level of stats. His drawback is that his MP pool is not that high, so I definitely do recommend mastering a lot of the archetypes to give you MP, but it is what it is. His endurance is pretty good as well, so he's definitely a beefy boy as well. Now his follow-up bond ability is Beast Scent Adept, or just Beast Scent, but basically you get higher evasion from attacks done by human monsters, which is very useful when you're fighting humans, obviously, which is a lot of the late game. So in that regard, like, actually, this one ability is actually quite useful in my opinion, just because like he procced it on my playthrough a bunch of times. So it's definitely, pretty useful as well. So in that regard, I think this ability is one of the best abilities, or one of the best follow abilities in the game. And then his archetype is the Berserker archetype, which we can take a look at. But the Berserker archetype is also one of the well, actually, it's probably one of the only two strength sort of archetypes in the game, and it's just, like, look at it, look at this beast. Looks absolutely amazing. And the thing is as well is like it knows charge straight off the bat as well, and then your access to a bunch of strike attacks, especially some of these abilities like Battle Cry Tackle, for example, are super useful. Especially because I do realize that, or at least I find out that a lot of the late game enemies are actually quite weak to strike, and some of those skellies as well, and some of those later dungeons where you can grind a lot are weak to strike. Now his second, or his peak archetype in the lineage, actually gives you access to a lot of elemental coverage as well, which is something that Strohl doesn't necessarily have. But Strohl does have that Thunder Charge Strike or whatever. But this guy has Windbreaker, Stormbreaker, and then synthesis as well. You've got Deadly Erasure, which is Almighty, which is just, which is actually just really like sick. The thing is as well, he can actually create strike weakness as well with Wanton Destruction, and so you can see sort of the combination that you can do with his base strike attacks as well as his synthesis ability with Wanton Destruction. And overall, like stuff like Revenge Seeker is really good. Short range boost as well is really good if you pair that with the Warlord line of, or the Commander line of archetype lineages, where you have the boost when you change formations to the front or to the back. For example, short range boost procs with that as well, stacks with that, and it's just really useful. And overall, he's a self-sufficient damage dealer with a good elemental coverage, and he does a shit ton of damage with Deadly Erasure. Now, in terms of damage stats, I think Royal Warrior does more, but I think in terms of just having, if you inherit Almighty Boost with Deadly Erasure, like it's game over pretty much. So in that regard, I think Basiliio is probably one of the best damage dealers in the game, and definitely sort of should be looked at with Strohl in a full strength build team with Junah just charging everyone with Masquerade Charge. Like, could you imagine that? Actually, no, I can't imagine that, because that's basically what I did for the late game. But yeah, Basiliio is an absolute G. Love this story, love this character design, love everything about his character in general. And yeah, his archetypes as well. Oh, and I didn't even mention his bloody Royal Berserker as well, which is basically the same thing, but you get like other utility based, like Peerless Warcry. Like, look at this. All enemy defense attack decrease for 3 turns. Like, that's insane. Systematic Destruction, Extreme Physical, like that's insane as well. Strike Surge, which is the plus 30% strike, and then Noble Berserker Soul. Like, yeah, some of this shit is just absolutely insane. And yeah, and I guess going back to the stat block as well, like, look, Strength 87, like one, rivals Strohl, and then Endurance rivals with Hulkenberg as well. So this dude can definitely stay alive and deal a lot of damage. So with that regards and everything I said before, Basiliio definitely gets put into the S tier for sure. Now, there is one party member that we have to discuss that in this part of this save, and I don't actually have a backup save for this, but you'll probably see some B-roll, is Grius. Now, Grius Definitely goes into F tier because he's absolutely freaking useless just because you can't control him. And I remember thinking like, why can't I control this dude? And then obviously, you know, when he gets taken out by Luis, that's when you sort of realize like, oh yeah, that's probably why. But yeah, he gets taken out by Luis. Doesn't really have much to do with the game. It is very sad with the dynamic between what happened with Maria losing her dad, for example. That was pretty fucking sad. But other than that, Grius is pretty useless. Goes into F tier 100%. Now, the last person that I'll probably have to mention is the protagonist in general, just because the protagonist has a unique archetype. But if we go through the story in general, what can I say? Like Metaphor in general, the story is absolutely amazing. The character of the protagonist is something that's, I don't know, it's just so well written. Like you could disagree with me on that one, but I think just how it's the embodiment of the prince. You know, the protagonist is basically the embodiment of the prince and how he wants to explore the world through his stories. It's like sort of he made like a little, I guess, alter ego sort of thing to discover the worlds that he never got the chance to discover, and then realizing that the world is worth saving and is worth, you know, beating tyranny and beating your anxieties and fears is worth that. And then them coming together, obviously doing the fusion dance or whatever to perform the protagonist with white hair is just absolutely incredible. And yeah, some of the best writing in the game for sure. Metaphor in general, I think this is really some of ATLUS's best work, and some of these storylines will definitely continue on with you for a very long time. So in that regard, story-wise for the protagonist, absolutely, you know, S++++. He's obviously going to be put into the exclusion tier 100% because he's just broken. Now, the thing is, you can mold him to whatever stats you want. You can do a balanced strength magic, which is what I've done here, which is probably not the smartest thing to do. But, you know, you can make him full strength as well, or full magic as well. But it's good that you can balance out his stat block. Now, the reason why he's in the exclusion tier is because of his royal archetype, or his just like base archetype in general, is the prince archetype. Yeah, let's be real. The prince archetype is absolutely broken. Like, it's not really a surprise that the prince is absolutely godly. It was actually a pretty good metaphor to you know, make the prince archetype the prince, you know. See what I did there? But yeah, the prince is absolutely broken, and the reason why is because he's got this thing called Hero's Cry, which gives you +4 press turns, but he's also got stuff like Cooperative Chase, which helps a lot in the overworld to get advantages. You've got Heroic Slash, which does heavy physical damage, slash damage. Hero's Proving, which is just basically self buff, which is super good. You've got Radiance, which is one of the highest damage dealing light attacks in the game. Morale boost that recovers HP and MP each time supporters, you know, in the overworld, you know, engage in overworld combat. Resist all, which is like resist all affinity other than Almighty, which basically makes him no weaknesses whatsoever. And then Royal Slash as well, which is just an ability as well, by the way, because Sinus as well, you do get Royal Sword, and from all accounts, like, I know one is severe, one is extreme, but by all accounts with Almighty boost, like, this just base attack without Synthesis does a lot of damage as well. And it's Almighty as well, so, you know. And then you've got all these attacks as well. You've got Armageddon's Final Seas, which, yeah, like, deals 9,999 damage to all enemies. But it does require, you know, heavy requirements to unlock that. But you got stuff like Windblade, Blaggett's Hammer, Fire Art, and all this stuff. Very good type coverage, very good just in general utility. And seriously, like, resist all, like, come on guys, like, seriously, like, this thing is absolutely busted. So that is why the protagonist must go into the exclusion tier, because let's be real, like, there's no other character in the game like him. So it's exclusion for sure. Now, obviously, with this tier list, it depends on how you built the characters in general. So some might be in B tier, some might be in C tier, some might move up into S tier. So it depends on what builds you guys did. But this is what I did and what I experienced through my first couple of playthroughs of Metaphor. And honestly, like, I think this is probably pretty fair. I don't think any of the party members are actually that bad compared to sort of other SMT games and Persona games. I do think there's a use for every single one of these party members, especially I think the combat is so well tuned and developed that you can actually use every single party member and you won't feel sad about you playing those certain characters. So that in that regard, I think Metaphor does a really good job at balancing. But yeah, obviously these characters can move up and down tiers. I know a lot of people are in S right now, but that's truly how I felt when playing through the game. So that's pretty much it on the tier list. What do you guys think? Agree? Disagree? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. if you haven't already. All it takes is just one click down below, and is always greatly appreciated, and leave a like as well, helps out the YouTube algorithm. Now, as always, thanks for watching everyone, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.